Hello, everyone, and welcome to another TVM webinar. This time with our usual suspect, our partner from Avalara, here with us. We're going to talk about E-Invoicing Revolution, navigating the evolving landscape of indirect taxes. It's a very hot topic, always bringing a lot of attention to us and to our conferences and webinars. And today we have Alex with us. Before I give the floor to Alex and to all our great panelists, I'm gonna just remind you guys watching us at home or in your office, if you do not have the time to finish this webinar today, it's okay, just shoot me a message on the chat and I will be sure to send you a link so you can watch the on-demand version of this webinar. As soon as it finishes, you will have the link for that same on-demand version. As the same chat, you can use the same chat to ask any questions during the panel discussion, and we'll do our best to answer those questions at the end. Although if we do not have time, rest assured that someone will reach out to you from Avalara or from TVM, and we will try to help you out with that question or maybe even clarify some points. If you have a Wi-Fi connection, if you have the option to connect with the cable, do so for you have a better experience. And right now, I'll be in the chat. If you need me, just shoot me a message. For now, Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm really excited to be with you today. And we've got a fantastic panel and agenda for you. So very, very briefly, a bit of background about me. I will be your host and moderator today. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm a senior director with Avalara. I have over 18 years experience within international indirect tax, so global VAT, GST, but also tax technology and e-invoicing. I started off my career in the Big Four with Deloitte, and I spent 13 years at Grant Thornton, leading international indirect tax, and that included a strategic secondment in the US, where I advised a lot of US multinational businesses on the impact of VAT on them. Today, I'm with Avalara, and I've been with Avalara coming up to 2 years now. I lead on global indirect tax, so looking at big legislative changes, catalysts around the globe, and ensuring that they are considered, analysed, and compliant in our technology and content. I'm also responsible for discussions and dialogues with governments and tax authorities across the globe. The other hat I wear, I'm the head of product for Avalara e-invoicing and live reporting. And I'm also a member of the European Commission's e-invoicing technical advisory group, so advising on changes to the European e-invoicing standard that are going to become very important as VIDA moves forward. And we're going to talk about VIDA in a bit more detail later on. I also represent Avalara with OpenPeple and ISPA, and I've recently been elected a member of the board of the Digital Business Networks Alliance, which is a brand new not-for-profit in the US to create, promote, and run a national e-invoicing network with a single standard. So I'd said we had a great panel. Really honoured to be joined by some real stars within indirect tax from some fantastic multinationals. So Liz, Jerome, Lisbeth, it'd be fantastic if you could introduce yourself to everyone on the webinar, provide a bit of background about yourself and your role.
Hi, I'm Liz Gallagher. I'm an indirect tax director in Meta. Most people know us as Facebook. I'm not going to try and outdo Alex because I think that would be an absolutely huge achievement on my part. I've been in VAT for over 23 years, I think now, so I can't outdo you there, Alex, but otherwise not a chance. I was previously at PwC for quite a long time and jumped to Meta about 7.5 years ago. Absolutely no regrets. For me, my passion has definitely moved over the years from indirect tax into tax transformation and technology, and I'm very privileged to be part of the TAG OECD group, and we are very much focused on e-invoicing. So looking forward to this discussion.
Okay, I'm Jerome Kakache, joined Ford in 1999. I have a background prior to Ford with the Chambers of Commerce and International Import and Export. In the time I've been with Ford, I've spent the better part of perhaps 18, 19 years working in the tax area, indirect tax, in the department they now call tax technology, implementing tax engines and tax reporting tools globally in every region of the world. And obviously e-invoicing has now come under the tax remit, so there's a lot of interest within Ford as to how we tackle e-invoicing, particularly in Europe with VIDA coming along.
Okay, I'm Lisbeth Koolmans. I am VT manager for the Agfa Group. That's a company active in a wide range of products and services globally, from chemical and specialty products to healthcare software services. I'm responsible for ensuring the proper VT setup for the entire Agfa Group, VT compliance and processes, but I'm also a member of the E-Invoicing Group within Agfa. And it's a pleasure to be here today and to be part of this panel and this interesting discussion.
Fantastic, thank you ever so much, and really looking forward to hearing some insights, from industry leaders who are actually having to deal with e-invoicing, digital reporting requirements on a daily basis. So, very briefly, I'm just going to provide a bit of background about Avalara. If you don't know who we are very much a global tax technology company, originally founded in the US in 2004, but today with offices and people around the globe. We have cloud-based tax automation solutions, primarily within the indirect tax space, helping our customers achieve compliance, reduce risk, and streamline their processes. And all three, very relevant when it comes to e-invoicing. We have over 1,200 pre-built integrations, so connections with ERPs and business platforms, all of the major accounting systems. We support over 30,000 companies globally. That number's a lot higher based on the number of companies that use our solutions that are embedded in business platforms around the globe. And we support about a third of the Fortune 500. We have end-to-end solutions across the traditional indirect tax lifecycle, supporting from everything from registrations for VAT, GST, fiscal representation, sales and use tax in the US, as well as registering a business for PEPL. We also help businesses classify their goods for import VAT and customs duty, but we're probably best known for our tax engine, which is a global tax engine supporting sales and use tax in the US, global VAT and GST, as well as customs duty. And we had almost 34 billion calls to our API for the tax engine in a single year. So, really used at scale by businesses across the globe. And then we also do e-invoicing. And of course, the focus of today's session, we provide a single scalable global e-invoicing solution that covers mandates and e-invoicing requirements across the globe in over 60 countries. And then finally, we also have SaaS solutions for the final piece of the puzzle, returns and reporting. So traditional VAT returns, as well as additional ledgers, SAFTs as well. And we prepared over 4 million returns. Businesses using our software filed 4 million returns across the globe. And I mentioned we support e-invoicing. We've launched a brand new next generation e-invoicing and live reporting solution based on a single API, a single ingest and mapping for businesses to make, based on a global standard universal business language. And then our engine will convert that to the relevant format regardless of the country mandate. So the format, we may add a digital signature if needed, a QR code, and we will send it to the right endpoint around the globe. That could be a tax authority platform or portal. It could be under a clearance model. It could be sent back to the ERP to be sent direct to the customer, or it could be sent on a network like Peppol to send and exchange the invoice that way. So a single way to comply. So to kick off with the discussion, I think we're going to start looking at the concept of an e-invoice and e-invoicing, because it really means different things to different people. And the term e-invoicing or digital live e-reporting is used to explain so many different compliance requirements, as well as traditional business processes. And a lot of tax authorities around the globe may call something e-invoicing, but really it may not be. So what is an e-invoice from the start? Well, it's not a traditional unstructured document, a document with unstructured data. So think paper, think a normal standard PDF, an invoice that's just been saved in Word or Excel, a document that's just been produced through scanning, OCR, and it's very much linked to manual processes, manual AP, manual AR, and the key point here is only really visible and readable by people. At the other end of the spectrum, you have fully structured data, something that is just visible to a system, to a machine, and it's structured data. And that's really, really important. And we're going to look at that definition in a bit later on. So traditionally, XML, two main varieties there, UBL, Universal Business Language, and also CII, the cross-industry invoice. But the problem about XML is you kind of need a degree in computer science to read it, because it's code. So, you know, I've seen this with businesses across the globe. They implement XML because that's, you know, what the tax authority says is needed and needs to be reported. But then you can't actually tell who the invoice is from, who you need to pay, what the amounts are. So even though there are technologies to turn that into a human readable version, and of course that is a requirement under the European VAT directive, what we're often seeing now is a hybrid approach, a hybrid document. The prime example of this is the PDF A3. And this is visible and readable by both systems and people. So on the face of it, it is a normal PDF. Your accounts payable team can view it. They can see all the information they would need. An auditor, a tax inspector could even print this off and view it on the screen. But at the same time, it has embedded XML within the document. So it can be fully automatically processed, read, interpreted by a system or by a tax authority platform. And I think we'll see more and more of this hybrid document. In France, the Facture X is one of the acceptable formats for the French mandate in 2026. In Germany, they already have the identical Zugford document. And in Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where a customer is unable to either read or process an XML, the only acceptable version, the human readable invoice under law, is this PDF A3. So based on that, I think we should kind of ask the panel, what is an e-invoice and digital reporting to you? What does it mean? And you know, can you give a few of the different flavors of e-invoicing and some of the confusion that your teams are often faced with? Liz, let's go straight to you on that.
Okay, I'm going to try quite a legal approach. So if you look at the definition that was in the 2022 EU report on VAT in the digital age, so e-invoicing, and I'm slightly abbreviating here because it is quite a long statement, is a compliance system requiring taxpayers to issue a structured e-invoice for VAT purposes. Structured means that the e-invoice must conform to machine-readable standard so that it can be automatically be processed. So exactly what you've described, Alex, kind of the old XML version. Then real-time reporting is something whereby the obligation on the taxpayer is to transmit transactional data shortly after the issuance of the invoice. So you're not actually transmitting the invoice itself, but rather an accumulation of data. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to give others an opportunity because that's quite a mouthful in itself.
Thanks. There's no really interesting. Jerome, do you have any perspectives there? You know, particularly in a big multinational, you know, there must be a lot of documents being exchanged. You've obviously got challenges of being tax compliant, but also these are kind of business critical processes as well.
Yes, they are. I mean, we've had to take an approach to have a practical solution on a country by country basis, because to some extent, e-invoicing has already been introduced in Europe, and certainly e-reporting has. We quite early on, going back maybe 5 or 6 years, looked at the ability to send from multiple transactional systems, multiple ERMs. That's one of the challenges we have. We have so many different transactional systems, to a single platform, and then use that platform generically to be able to send the information electronically to the authorities, whether it's early on it's just for e-reporting purposes and also for SAFT. So we had to do that in Spain, for instance, for SII, had to do it in Hungary for real-time reporting, RTR, and then countries like Italy, where e-invoicing is effectively already introduced, with invoices being required to be sent to the tax authorities portal prior to being sent to suppliers or customers. All of that we had to put in place. What we're now starting to consider is strategically, how can we make use of the platform we've already got in place for those early adopters to take into account the requirements on a per country basis being introduced by VIDA, and recognizing that all those individual countries actually have very different definitions of what they mean by e-invoicing and the data elements that they're expecting to get from us as a multinational. So yes, this is very much at the forefront of everyone's mind now.
Thank you very much. So, you know, I think that is interesting, because we have the legal definition, you know, very much focused on tax, being compliant, from a legislative perspective, being compliant from, you know, what the tax authority expects, and the, you know, the risk of penalties, the risk of, you know, not being able to recover input tax on invoices you receive as well. But we also see this as a business process. You know, there's a big accounts receivable, accounts payable angle here, and you know, so e-invoicing, I would say there's two sides to it. You know, one, you have the exchange of an e-invoice, which is a digital document with structured data between suppliers and their trading partners, customers, intercompany, intergroup. But also, that's forced to be in a consistent format. So there'll be a consistent format of document mandated by a tax authority, and the content of that document is consistent as too. So, you know, very scalable, you know, good for automation, but really providing really granular data for tax authorities, which of course is the driver here. You know, they want to see the whole transaction. They want to move away from a summary periodic VAT return. That invoice, it could be sent on an open network like PEPL, in Italy, in Poland next year, maybe a more centralized model where the invoice is actually received via a government portal. So a big change to business process there. You know, we still see some e-invoices exchanged on email, particularly that PDF A3. When I was in South America recently, I heard about some businesses in Chile who'd been exchanging XMLs on WhatsApp. You know, new technologies, new ways of exchanging things. You know, maybe this will evolve in the future. And historically, a lot of businesses sharing invoices on procurement networks, accounts payable networks. So before mandates came into play, a lot of businesses would have to log into different portals, sign up for different procurement networks, really have to be on the same network as the trading partner. But you know, that is very much changing now as the world of tax and e-invoicing and EDI merge together. And that's the other side of e-invoicing. You know, very much the reporting of tax and transactional data to a tax authority. You know, usually part of the same process, but it can be standalone, it can be parallel. So, you know, Jerome mentioned Hungary, the real-time reporting there, that invoice can be paper, it can be PDF, but there's still a requirement to report that data. So, loads of different models.
I think, Alex, it is worth stressing that there is a very close link between the ability to raise e-invoicing and e-reporting. So e-reporting is something historically that we've had to comply with already. E-invoicing is adding to that. The fact that the two of them are so intrinsically linked, and also the fact that they need to reconcile back to your general ledger, means that all of the systems that you may be using themselves have to be interlinked, which is why we're considering using it as a single platform to do both the e-reporting side of things and the e-invoicing side of things.
I think that's a really, really good point. And suddenly there's such a clear link with the transaction and the single source of truth. This is not aggregating data after the fact from different sources. Suddenly the basis of a lot of this live reporting, often in real time, e-reporting of data is directly from that e-invoice, which has challenges as well, because some of the reporting regimes involve reporting cross-border international supplies. So Italy, for example, you now have to report invoice data in an XML format for invoices that you've issued or received cross-border. So those documents coming in may be in paper, they may be in PDF, they may be in other formats. But the business has to get that into the right format, report it within quite a tight time frame. So, lots of challenges there.
I think, Alex, isn't that the risk as well? Because you've got Italy did that, but France are going to do something different. France are going to do e-invoicing at a local level, but real-time reporting on a cross-border basis. So, and this leads to the uncertainty and the risk for us as companies trying to now maneuver our way around these changes as they come at us like a tsunami is the word I'm going to use. So I think that is the biggest issue I know we're facing, is they're not doing the same thing, they're not doing it in the same way. If you look at the definition of e-invoicing, it talks about an e-invoice for VAT purposes, but if you look at the Polish schema, it doesn't look anything like the content on an invoice, because they've gone into logistics data, they're going into banking data, and with that comes massive additional build and resource requirements, and so it is definitely a very tricky environment, but maybe exciting in the same sentence.
Which also leads to a question which we'll probably come back to during the course of this conversation, as to the ownership of this process, the overall process, because although tax reporting clearly is under the tax remit or the tax department, tax technology department, whatever they might be called, e-invoicing, or the processing of invoices from suppliers, or the creation of invoices going out to customers, has traditionally been the role of the finance departments, or the accounts payable department, or accounts receivable department. Suddenly, because the e-invoicing is being linked to e-reporting, they're turning to the tax department and saying, well, tell us what your definition of an e-invoicing is, and tell us how you're going to comply with what the tax authorities are asking for e-invoicing, which means that we have to start understanding what our upstream transactional systems are doing, how to capture the information that they're producing, and as an outbound, create those e-invoices on their behalf. And it's on their behalf, which is where the ownership question comes.
That ownership question is really interesting, and I want to kind of double click into that in a minute. But I just want to pick up on something Liz talked about. We talked about Poland, we talked about France, we talked about the tsunami of new mandates, new requirements coming almost on a daily basis. It feels like that. I think I'm tracking about 161 kind of changes or proposals at the moment in relation to e-invoicing. But I think it's important. Like, this timeline, very indicative. By the time you read this, it may have already changed, because we all know this is very fluid, subject to derogations from the European Commission, but also subject to delays. Tax authorities need to build the infrastructure. They need legislation to be in place in time, and businesses ultimately need time to prepare. But if you look at the left-hand column here, the last 20 years, predominantly Latin America, Chile, Brazil, some of the trailblazers for e-invoicing, and the rest of the region followed very, very quickly. Where we saw e-invoicing in Europe, it tended to be public procurement, business to government, and that's where the European e-invoicing standard, the PEPL network, has its origins. But both of those are likely to be scaled for broader business-to-business use under VAT in the digital age. But if you look at the last couple of years, things are starting to change. More and more e-invoicing mandates around the globe, more pilots, proposals, mandates appearing across Europe. Serbia from the 1st of January this year, further B2G e-invoicing mandates, Luxembourg, Belgium, the spread of PEPL to Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. And then, as mentioned, next year, Poland. From the 1st of July next year, KSEF e-invoicing becomes mandatory for business-to-business e-invoicing. And, that's really interesting. You have to produce an invoice that meets the local schema, the FA VAT2 that's recently been released. The Polish tax authority actually convert that to a PDF that's completely in Polish. And suddenly from next year, every invoice in Poland looks the same. And without having the unique Polish KSEF number that's allocated, that invoice is not legal for tax purposes. So, a really, really big change for business processes. Some of you might expect to see France and Spain on this timeline for next year. That was always the plan. In the last couple of weeks, we've heard of a revised timeline from the French tax authority, still waiting to be confirmed formally in the finance bill later this quarter. But the original date of the 1st of July 2024 is now going to be pushed back. The current thinking is March 2026 for the rollout of the mandate, and then potentially in 2 different phases, but within a short period of time, maybe October 26 for the second wave. There'll be a pilot the year before in 2025, and next year the tax authority will start accrediting PDP providers. So, before we move back into that interesting topic about who should own this, all these different stakeholders, does anyone have any thoughts on this timeline? Is there any thoughts on any particular countries here, any war stories, or even your kind of reaction to delays? Is it welcomed? Is it kind of wasted prep work that you've done?
I think it's really hard to try and manage it presently. So I'm in the same position as Jerome, so I'm not the owner, which is a positive for me. I'm actually just a stakeholder. It's owned by finance with Inside Meta, which again I agree with because it just makes sense to me with a bit of a business background as well. It's a must-have. We can't do business unless we raise these invoices. So in Poland, if we don't have the right invoice in the future, the customer can't do business with us. So we view it as part of our finance team, but we're very big supporters. We're a key stakeholder. We're involved in the implementation. We'll park the maintenance afterwards. But I worry about something like Spain. So they're telling us they're going to issue a regulation in December, maybe January or next year, and a 1-year timeline. Like anything we're seeing coming out of France having to defer, Poland sadly having to defer many times at this point, this takes at least 3 to 4 years minimum. So then you're monitoring a country like Spain, you're trying to keep, so I have to have an engineering team here on kind of high alert to say, look guys, I still have these in potentially 25, but it could move, it might move. For me, I usually need an absolute minimum of 6 months to get something on a roadmap. So this constant uncertainty that we're having, particularly in Europe, is driving and probably testing the relationships I have with my engineering teams, with my finance team. But we all know we're trying to do our best here, and I think the best they're doing right now is connecting to my LinkedIn profile so that they can try and keep up with what's going on as well. So that's where I see risk for us. It is very unstable, and then the regimes themselves, they're not similar, they're very different, and the work that goes into trying to monitor all of this, manage it, implement it, is going to be quite demanding on what are quite small teams of people, usually within an indirect tax function.
I can confirm what Liz is saying, and I completely understand her. And I'm also curious to understand why the European Union postponed the VT in a digital age, and they are now still talking about it and certain discussions and fine-tuning, whereas certain individual member states are already proceeding, but that will give us extra work, extra, as Liz mentioned, we need to get back to the business or certain ICS related people to say, oh, we implemented that country already in 2024, but VIDA now states that we need to change something. So for us, it will be very challenging, especially for the European region, to understand how VT in the digital age will finally look like and what repercussions it might have on like the countries that will go live in 2024 and 2025 before VIDA enters into force. So I'm very curious how it will evolve. Yeah.
Alex, you're very close to the Commission. I know I've heard from a number of sources that like getting agreement at the European Commission level is going to be very difficult because you've got someone like Italy in the room already implementing, France halfway there, Poland pretty much heading for the finish line. They don't want to have to suddenly derail that because they've invested heavily to make it work. But the other thing I've heard is one member state basically told me that we're under political pressure. They feel that they were given an opportunity to think about what they were going to do with respect to digital transformation, with respect to indirect tax particularly, and they can't wait for VIDA first. So they're potentially going to bring in a local regime first and then do VIDA afterwards. It seems to be very politically driven. It's driven very much at a sovereign level, which is why maybe you're seeing all these countries do it individually. But I'd love to hear from Alex, particularly. Sorry now, but I'm going to grab him because I know he sits at the Commission level. So I'm sure you're hearing a lot more than we are, but we're definitely hearing a lot of sovereign conversation that's being had.
I think you summarised, the current state of play very well. There is a lot of kind of goodwill and consensus. That we should be moving towards more harmonisation. Kind of reap the benefits of digitalisation as well. But you're completely right. A lot of these member states have invested millions in infrastructure, in the platform, in rolling out these e-invoicing regimes and mandates. So, it's whether they're willing to kind of rip up and rebuild. My gut feeling is, there's going to be a lot of debate in terms of what is a clearance model. It's often more kind of academic debate that we hear at e-invoicing conferences. People like to have nice diagrams of different models and showing the benefits and disadvantages. But in reality, if you're sharing structured data, you need to have rules. You need to have special rules around the schematic checks. You need to validate the content, or else an e-invoicing model doesn't work because the tax authority aren't getting consistent data, and businesses aren't having interoperability with each other if there's discrepancies in the data. So some of these models, some of the validation, some of the what is traditionally known as clearance checks, a lot of that must still be allowed post VIDA, or else you don't reach interoperability. You're not validating and confirming that the data meets the right standard. So I think there's going to be a lot of debate and discussion. We certainly need every single member state to agree. And even some of the smaller member states, who maybe don't really have their own plans to introduce e-invoicing. By voting for this, they're at least going to have to introduce this at a cross-border level. And I think that that's where the consensus is certainly going to be around intra-community. We know intra-community fraud is a big reason for the VAT gap. Tax authorities want better visibility. They want better data than they receive on the EC sales list today. So I think that's going to be the common ground. I think it's going to be changes to existing models. It's going to be the kind of certain grandfathering rights to certain digital reporting that's done today. But it's also going to be what changes need to be made to existing models. France, Poland, Italy, Romania. That was a big shock to me. I thought the European community wouldn't approve and issue a derogation for a model that wasn't really compliant with VIDA. We saw a week before the VIDA announcement in December, Germany submitted a request for a derogation, but it was 100% in line with VIDA, almost word for word. So we are going to have this problem at the moment where businesses have to comply. They have to be compliant from the get-go. They need to meet these current requirements. But then there's the possibility that you're going to have to restart these projects later down the line.
Yeah, you're going to have to look at these countries one by one, despite the fact that they should have a commonality. And in terms of Romania, I was in a meeting this morning. Apparently, Romania last night announced that it would be January 24 to June 24, with a deadline at the latest of March 24 before they start fining people for not complying. The law passed through last night, so it is very fast moving, this stuff. The other risk that I would take into account is that you can't rely on the big transactional systems providing a solution for you. The big ones like SAP and Ariba, the Microsofts. It's fine asking them what they intend doing to comply with VIDA or to comply with e-invoicing, and the marketing departments of those companies would obviously tell you, yes, of course, we're going to meet the legal compliance. But when it comes to the technical solutions, those solutions are down the road, partly because they're in the same boat as we are. And as so-called experts on tax and e-invoicing, if we're struggling to get definitions of what the authorities are looking for, you can imagine that these big companies are also struggling to get the same definitions. They're in the same position as we are. But I wouldn't rely on them necessarily coming up with an out-of-the-box solution for you.
I am also curious about if there would be guidelines on country level, on European level, or OECD level, as on which service provider are reliable and compliant with these difficult invoicing regulations. As Jerome mentioned, it's so specific, and there are so many service providers on the market that for companies who are active globally, it's very difficult to understand, okay, can this company deal with my e-invoicing requirements globally, or should I rely on a local service provider who knows it best? And I'm very curious to hear or to understand later on if there would be a recommendation list or certifications granted to certain service providers to which multinationals or companies, any companies can go to, okay, these are reliables, and if I trust my system with them, they can comply with it, irrespective of the ERP system I have. Will it work with SAP? Will it work with Oracle, a smaller system? I'm very curious to understand, if that would be an approach that might be taken in the future, a local level or global level. Yeah.
I think that's a really good question, and I can provide a few insights on that from a service provider perspective. A lot of countries will have accreditation processes, certification processes, and that often has quite a high standard. So, for example, PEPL, a provider needs to be a certified provider. They need to go through quite a big application process, including testing. There is a new requirement under PEPL to have ISO security certification. That's also going to be a requirement in Malaysia and in France for the mandate in 2026. So, those processes do vary in terms of the requirements. Some countries provide more of an indicative list of local providers. But I also agree with the point about ERP providers. This is so complex, and the scale of this, it's very difficult for those ERP providers to actually provide this out of the box. So, we're seeing this a lot now. We're seeing more collaboration with partners, giving multinationals the ability to use and connect to third-party software. Last week I was in Las Vegas for Oracle Cloud World, and we are now seeded within Oracle Fusion. So anyone on Oracle Fusion can use and activate Avalara e-invoicing, almost out of the box. But I think this is going to be more common. We're going to see more partnerships. We're going to see more ability for businesses to select, their single global provider. And there are, some good providers out there, and we all have to work together. And I think France has really demonstrated that. For France, it's not okay for just a handful of large providers to put their hand up and issue a press release to say we're ready for France, because these e-invoicing regimes that rely on interoperability only work if every single provider connects with every single provider and everyone is ready. It's almost one of those kind of, we're all in this together. I would provide that advice to businesses as well. You may be ready for e-invoicing, but are your suppliers, are your customers? If you're in a position where you are the larger multinational, work with them. Share best practice. Stakeholder communications are really, really key.
Yeah, a couple of points there, Alex, because I mean, it was mentioned in one of the previous slides that this is both accounts payable and accounts receivable, but really you've got to recognize that e-invoicing means you've not only got to be able to create invoices going out to your customers in e-invoicing format, you've also got to be able to consume e-invoices that are coming from your suppliers. They're not necessarily the same thing, and you've got to be sure that the platforms that you're using are going to be able to do both. In Ford, we have the added complication that we raise self-billing invoices. So we raise invoices on behalf of our suppliers because we have high volume, low value invoices. So it makes sense for us to raise the invoices on their behalf. It's not clear. Romania is the first country where we've actually asked this directly to the tax authorities. It's not clear who has ultimate responsibility for providing the e-invoicing format of a self-billing invoice. Do you do it on behalf of your supplier, or do you provide it to your supplier to provide to the authorities? There are some key open questions that we haven't got answered yet.
And that was actually something in Poland which took a really long time to get confirmation on. So Italy didn't do self-billing. Poland are doing, so we have a large self-billing environment as well. It's very common within tech. And Poland did eventually come out and inform us that we would have the obligation to report on behalf of those that we were self-billing for. We have the same problem in Romania. No guidance with a really short timeline. So it's quite a worry. Romania is probably the one that's worrying me most at the moment, because technically we don't have a local entity, but we can get pulled in because they've used the word VAT registration rather than fixed establishment or establishment. So I think they've gone way too broad, and I don't think they've realised now what they're doing. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm trying to show concern here that this is being rolled out very fast, with not the level of Q&A information that we've received from Poland, that we're receiving from France on a very timely basis. So I think for me, Romania is the one at the moment that I feel is quite concerning as we come to the end of the year.
That's the other aspect to be aware of. It's not just, as you said, Liz, it's not just businesses that have a presence within the country. If you're a multinational that's tax registered within that country, so Ford Werke, for instance, to take just one example, which is registered, is obviously a German company, they are registered in 17 different countries around Europe, including Romania. So they are obliged for any invoices that they're either being sent or that they're producing on behalf of the registration in Romania, that has to be in e-invoicing compliance as well. So
yeah, and I have an entity that just literally makes intercommunity acquisitions. No human and technical resources, shipping something in, blah, blah, blah. And that's, you're just sitting there going, oh my goodness gracious, this is going to be, and we're not getting the answers to the questions. So it's very hard to, I can't go near engineers right now because I don't know what I actually need, with a very tight timeline coming down the tracks.
Yeah. I think there is concern across the industry and amongst businesses. So look, let's just hope there is a lot of collaboration over the next few weeks. So we can make it a success. So we've been looking at the future. We've been looking at new mandates coming in, often at short notice. There's also been various different implementations of e-invoicing over the years. Jerome, you talked about experiences in Brazil, for example. Are there any kind of war stories, any best practices, any learning that you or your kind of company has taken from those historic ones?
Yeah, to some extent, we've been fairly lucky so far in that the countries where e-invoicing applies have really been countries where we have presence only in terms of a sales company and not necessarily as a manufacturing company. So the number of transactional systems that we have for a sales company is fairly minimal. It's going to be, maybe 2 receivable systems and 2 payable systems but in a manufacturing country, we're talking anything up to about 30 or 35 different transactional systems, which means that we have to comply on every one of those transactional systems. And although we're going through a process of trying to bring down those legacy systems to a small handful, introducing SAP, for instance, which is an ongoing project, we're still not there yet. So when it comes to places like Germany and Spain and Germany, Spain, and Romania, in particular, where we used to have a manufacturing industry, that would be a major concern. How do we get all those 31 transactional systems on board to an e-invoicing solution? Countries like Italy, where it's just a sales company, or Finland, for that matter, where they already have e-invoicing, we've introduced e-invoicing, meeting those local requirements, but we did it on a per transactional system basis, so 4 or 5 systems only. When we talk about places like Spain and Germany, we can't do that. Strategically, we have to think about how to get the information from those 31 systems, bring it into a single place, consolidate it, and then use that one platform to then produce the e-invoices. And that goes back to the ownership question. Okay, so if the tax department start consuming all this data from these upstream transactional systems, which we've had to do already because we do e-reporting on their behalf, can we use that platform for creating an e-invoicing solution? They're the sort of conversation we're now starting to have with people like yourself, Avalara, and several others that are in the market to say that we can do this. In effect, you're talking about one ERM because it's taken the information from the 31 others.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that's the question on everyone's mind, like how can you scale e-invoicing? Historically, almost a game of whack-a-mole, new mandate came up, often delegated to a local finance manager, a local team to find a solution. And, sometimes that was outsourced. Look, we can actually outsource this to a provider who will take my data, play around with it and submit it. For e-invoicing, it may be a local bolt-on patch for an ERP, maybe a brand new provider on the local market, who's built something just to meet the very distinct local requirement. But that approach isn't really scalable now because
no, it's not. There's a growing awareness that it's not.
Exactly. There's a lot of tech debt there. And it's not sustainable because it's infrastructure you're going to have to maintain. You need to train your people on it. But also, e-invoicing mandates requirements don't stay still. It's not like you build to a schema and then you can sit back. Unfortunately, there are regular changes, the scope, the document formats, the standards, even new requirements around QR codes, digital signatures. So, I suppose my final question to you all before we go to a Q&A is, what's your advice on looking at this strategically and from a kind of scalability point of view?
Yeah, well, it goes back to the awareness. So the local teams are becoming aware of the fact that they can't necessarily deal with this locally. So they are starting to look centrally to say, what can we do, I guess, strategically to ensure that we're complying with this across the region of Europe and beyond. And that comes back to the ownership question again. So if it's not going to be the local teams, who is it going to be? And the obvious answer to most of the departments, certainly moving forward, is, well, let's turn to the tax team because they're the ones that are already reporting on our behalf from across all the different systems. That's a concern because it means you've got to ramp up your resources. So one of the first things you have to do is start talking to the high-level management in all the different departments, whether it's purchasing or receivables department, marketing department, all these different areas of the business who are raising invoices or consuming invoices or processing invoices, and explain to them, this is coming our way. It's a major storm cloud that's coming our way. We can't ignore it. how do we go about strategically resolving this? Where's the budget going to come from? Where are the resources going to come from? Who's going to take charge of it? You know, and they're very happy to turn around and say, well, you take charge of it. Okay, so that's where you've got to start having the conversation. Yeah, thanks. Well, if we do it on your behalf, then everyone's got to contribute. And we've got to have an assurance that you will actually comply with what we're asking you to do, because what we may be asking you to provide to us is the sort of information that perhaps you're not already providing to us. So the owners of all those different systems have got to be on board. Those are conversations that we're already having, and you need to have, because it's not going to go away.
Thank you. Lisbeth, any insights from you on this?
I wanted to share indeed, in addition to what Jerome mentioned, is that indeed we have like an e-invoicing steering group, a central group within the company, to talk these regulations through, to understand how the system setup currently works, and how it should work, or what should be changed to understand that we can be compliant with the e-invoicing regulations. I think that's one of the most critical things, that we as tax experts or indirect tax experts understand how the system is set up. Like if we need a new tax code to be set up, that it might have repercussions on the XML that's used for e-invoicing, so that if you think you can change the tax codes, check also the underlying setups, that your XML is properly changed. Like also in the customer master data, you also experience that the VAT identification numbers that are maintained in there, they should also show on the e-invoices, that you really understand as a tax expert all the technical aspects, underlying aspects, that you know what any repercussions might be, and that you discuss these kind of things in a core team meeting. We're very grateful that we have such kind of core team meetings, and I think that's one of the main and critical aspects, to be sure that you can scale it from a global point of view, and that you can get a uniform approach within all the different group companies you might have. So that's my insights. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that's really great practice there, a steering group, and I think you're lucky that the company's bought into that. And before I go to Liz for some kind of final words of wisdom, I just provide some feedback. We're receiving hundreds of RFPs at the moment, from businesses who are trying to select a solution, but they're very much focused on the technology, and it seems to be very driven by procurement, very security tech heavy. But when you then meet and have the ability to ask questions, and you say, well, who's going to implement this, or who's leading this from a tax perspective, often they don't have the answers. It's almost been handed to IT or finance and then to a procurement team. So if you have the ability, as a tax SME, as owning that indirect tax function, to play a real key role and drive it, I think that's going to lead to a much more successful project and outcome.
Yep. I would first, before you go, Liz, sorry, I wouldn't rely just on IT to come up with solutions to this. You really need business knowledge and business acumen, and you also can't rely just on the business. You actually have to have both. They need to be working in harmony, because it's very much a technical solution to a business problem.
I think for us, there's a strong weather warning coming. We all know there's a storm on its way, and it's about to turn into a hurricane. But at the same time, I'm probably quite privileged here that we're doing this very much at a global level. We've got implementations in Latin America, but because we don't have local entities in some of these countries, we haven't had the same bang effect as I'd say Jerome and Ford have had, or some of the kind of goods side of the world have had. But we're learning from them, which is great as well, to be a part of any kind of panel you get into right now with pharma or anything like that on the good side. But I am very privileged as well that I believe we have a lot to bring as indirect tax people. I think the expertise we can bring to the room in taking the legislation and understanding it, breaking it down. What we're doing a lot with our enterprise engineering team is literally saying to them, okay, what's the best way I can deliver here? Don't make assumptions for other people, because I'm not an engineer. So I'm assuming if I give them the schema, that's great. But actually, in fact, they may prefer me to compare the Italian schema to the Polish one and tell them what the gaps are. So it's really having those conversations with those stakeholders to understand what they need so that they can meet their objectives. Because at the end of the day, I work in a company where it's all about meeting your objectives. And if you can help everyone else to achieve that, it usually ends up with a much better project and a better success for everyone. So I'm quite happy at Meta that we're going to do it, but I do think it's going to take a lot of teamwork to achieve it.
Thanks, Liz. Really insightful.
Hello again. Thank you guys for this panel discussion. I gotta say that it's just not enough time. It's just not enough time for all of this. Just a few days ago, last 2 weeks ago, we had a summit in Amsterdam where Avalara was as well our main partner there, and 2 days of summit, of intensive meetings and networking. It was not enough. People are keep on asking questions after the event. People are keep on coming back and asking for contacts from each other, so they can put their heads together and find a solution for all these very complex, I would not say problems, but advances and pushbacks from the legislation and all that. So I think that this is the way to go. Initiatives like this that Avalara is keep on pushing with us, with TBM, both on summits and physical events, and on webinars that give the power to people like you that are struggling and trying to find a way to get your voices heard and to make it happen somehow. Because if we keep on our little not all the time, but in our offices with a closed door trying to face the problem and we cannot find a solution, and if you put our heads together, it's a different path. So thank you, Avalara. Thank you, Alex. From the other side, Lisbeth, Jerome, thank you so much for making time. We still have a couple of minutes, and I was looking at the questions, and it's not really a question, but people are asking for some comments. We have been tackling this during this past hour, but quickly, if you can give us a little bit of what some comments on what's the main reason why keep on postponing the implementation of e-invoicing in some countries and the EU VIDA as well. Why this is keeping happening? Everyone saw that this is the way to go, but why do you think that the postponing is happening at this moment?
I think the reality of trying to implement these, especially e-invoicing, is misunderstood. And once they start the process, they realize the difficulty and it gets deferred over and over in some cases, yeah.
I think there's likely to be a lot of pushback from the larger companies, even the medium-sized companies, to the authorities. There's a lot of lobbying going on, I would imagine. But it wouldn't surprise me if some of the governments are actually saying the amount of data that we're asking for is going to be difficult to handle. You know, careful what you wish for in terms of the governments. You know, you're going to get swamped with data. Are you going to be able to handle it? And they're probably finding that's quite a difficult thing for them to cope with. Romania is an exception.
We recently actually attended an event, and there was one particular member state there. It was an OECD event, and the representative was very clear in saying, "I need your help now, businesses." So we have business at OECD that sits at the table, and it was, please contact us and tell us that this needs to be slowed down. This is too quick. It's not going to happen. So when you have a representative coming and asking for that kind of support, you know that there's a fear there, and they're asking. The consultation I'm super impressed by, and I hope this continues at the government level, where they're asking businesses to come in. They want to understand what our pain points are. If that continues, I think this can work better in the long term. They're willing to have dialogue.
Better to get it right than to rush it and get it wrong.
Totally.
Yeah. Thank you so much once again from our side. This is all the time we have for today. For you guys watching at home, if you have some question that wasn't answered because we simply ran out of time, we'll be sure to come back to you and try to address those questions. If you arrive in the middle of the webinar and you want to watch the first part, rest assured that we will send you the link for the on-demand version, and you can as well share that link with colleagues, with people that you know in the industry that are struggling with this as well, and can get some of the insights that we shared today. So be sure to leave me a short message, and I will be sure that you get that link for the on-demand version. I will just give now the floor to Alex back, so can say a few words. Guys, if you want to say your goodbyes, this is the time. But from my side, from TBM side, thank you, Avalara. Thank you, everyone that is here today. and made this possible, make the space in your agendas to be here. And yes, it was a pleasure. Alex.
Well, thank you for organising this, and most importantly, thank you ever so much to Elizabeth, Liz, and Jerome for taking time out of your day to be part of this discussion. I found it really interesting. You know, it's refreshing just to have a chat and a conversation, and just talk about real life business experiences. So I've enjoyed it. I really hope everyone at home watching has too. Please do reach out if you have any questions. Do follow me on LinkedIn. Liz is another great star on social media to follow. Lots of updates from around the globe. But thank you ever so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.